In this lesson, we will be integrating ESLint into the project. ESLint is a technology for static code analysis that allows us to create some agreements between team members or even with yourself about how our code should look. If something relatively minor is done, like step sizes or which quotes should be used, ESLint can help us determine, for example, that in if statements we can't write like this, but should write like that. Personally, I like it better this way, and I want it to work like this. And there are many other things that ESLint allows us to format. Let's start integrating it and gradually figure it out. To begin, I suggest cleaning up what is related to ESLint, the ESLint that is default in web app. So they removed it. Let's remove it for now and add our own, what we need, in our root. So let's go. We copy the installation commands and go to the root. We will need a package, there ESLint. Then we will take the ESLint.config.prettier package so that prettier does not conflict with ESLint because they both will help us automatically format our code. Then ESLint.config for the React application and ESLint.config.standard.via TypeScript. It is just a bunch of pre-configured rules according to the standard. It's a very conditional term for standard. There's just a set of such rules, and they exist separately from TypeScript, but can also exist together with TypeScript. All right, let's just install all these dependencies. And while they are installing, we'll create a file eslint.rc.yml in which we will define our eslint.config. So, to see how this file is created, you can, of course, check the ESLint documentation. And this needs to be done. But in practice, you just create something, then work on it, and see, for example, there is some annoying default rule that you want to disable. Sometimes, on the contrary, you are missing a rule and want to add it. Gradually, your file grows and various rules are added. Here is my ESLint.config. Let's go through it a bit. We indicate that it inherits these two configs, the standard in TypeScript and prettier. It should ignore everything in Node.modules and in the dist folder, and then just a bunch of rules. And those marked with off mean that I want to disable them. So, these rules irritated me, and I'm fine living without them. But some rules I actually want to introduce. For example, here I'm establishing rules on how files should be imported, and in what order. We don't have many imports here right now. Here we have two. So if, for instance, another developer comes and adds some feature, they'll always be organized the same way, with no differences in commits. In general, there are, well, for example, I also prohibit using the console predominantly here. So, if you wrote console.log in the code, let's consider it's only needed during development because it outputs to your screen. In practice, such code shouldn't remain, and by default, I allow only console info to be used. So if you wrote console info, it means this log is needed technically for production, and console.log, with various 1, 2, 3, and other debug things, should not fall into our repository. All right, we've set up this ESLintRC.config, but we set it up at the top level. Now let's also make it work both in the backend and the frontend. Add to the backend a config which is also called ESLintRC.yml. And the thing is, these ESLint configs inherit from each other. So this config, by default, inherits from that one. But since we have a TypeScript application in the backend, it also needs the path to the ts config file for proper operation when applying all these rules. On the back end, everything is fairly primitive. This is all we need. The front end is slightly more complicated. Firstly, there is already an ESLint RC on the front end. We'll remove it for now as well, and add our ESLint rc.yml file. We need to pass this config into it. We state that it inherits from React app, as well as our config from the root. We also provide the path to the tsconfig file and indicate that there is a certain tsconfig related to this file. So here we wrote overwrites for specific files. So for everything, roughly speaking, in the src folder, we will use this tsconfig. For what's in the white config.ts file, this one will be used. And there is a nuance in VS Code. To make tsconfig work properly in monorepo, we need to create a folder here called VS Code, and inside it, settings-based sum. And pass this kind of structure into it. Just specify the working folders. Done. This has been added. And now, theoretically, everything should work. Let's see. Yes, and you will also need the ESLint extension for VS Code. Here it is. The link will be provided to the lesson. Let's see what we've changed. Added various ESLint RC. So, what do we have in Web API ESLint RC? Yes, and in Web API ESLint RC. It's quite relevant. Okay, now let's go see if it worked for us. Let's check my story with if. If true. Oh, it's complaining about everything now. Look, first of all, it started complaining about unexpected use of a constant in if. Well, logically, it's complaining about console log because I asked to disallow console log. Then, if we call the command yes, here I called the command palette again. And here you can call the ESLint fixall after fixable problems command. You can also set a hotkey for it or memorize it. I'm calling it, you see. It automatically adds brackets here for me. Ah, good. So, on the back end, it functions at the code editor level. Let's go and check if it works in our web API. All right. Well, here's the non-null assertion. It complains. It already does. Well, see, here's the normal problem. Because technically, when we look for an element with the root ID, it might not exist. But according to the agreement, we find out that it exists. And therefore, we can put an exclamation mark. An exclamation mark means it's okay, but actually it might not be there. But I give you my word, it's not null or undefined, exactly. And generally, it's not good to do so. But since Veit himself said that he's fine with it, we can basically ignore this rule in this section. For this, you can invoke the context menu and say to disable this rule just for this line. Okay, you've disabled it. But actually, in your code, when you encounter something like this, and you absolutely need to trigger an error, you can do it like this. Const. Well, all right. Root element, and there you assigned it. And what's the next construction? If you have no root element, you really need to throw an angry error. There. Pass the root element here. But Vite developers aren't fools. There might be strange exceptions where this shouldn't work as expected. So, I suggest not to argue with them, and not to write such constructions ourselves. So you see, we find out that now root element, it's definitely a stable element. And before checking, we knew it could be null. That's all. This is basically the story of TypeScript and how to deal with such things. But let's revert it as it was because we don't know why they did it that way. But since they did it like that, maybe it's needed. That's all the logic. All right, so, okay. Well, we all see that ESLint is already starting to complain about us everywhere. It's checking everything. So, let's now add scripts that will check this from our console. Yes. So let's first add the backend. Backend. Let's show the JSON. We need a lint script, which we'll call. And there will be a command like this. Let's remove it a bit. ESLint is invoked. We ask it to cache the work results so it works faster on repeated calls. We also specify that its cache location will again be in our already existing not nodulus.cache folder, and ask it to check TypeScript files in this folder, meaning the current one, which is the backend folder. Dot means the current folder. Okay, invoked. So we'll go in. Now let's call this script. We remember that we now have, this is pnpmb, and it will translate the command into a covered JSON backend. pnpmb, lint. Okay. Oh, well, something's complaining. Okay, just a transition. Look. Moreover, it says that all these errors can be automatically fixed by calling the flag fix. Let's look at them first, at these errors. Yes, it's complaining about the order of imports. Okay, let's call the same command and add fix. When we add something after this command, it will also just be attached to this big command. That's it. We call it. Let's see what happened. Oops. He fixed everything, and no more errors found. Let's do the same now for the web app. Going to the web app, cover JSON, it's already linked somehow, but we'll add our own link here, 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 here. Essentially the same structure here. The only difference is that we also ask to check TSX files. TSX files are those that include JSX. Yep. So, saved. Now let's run this same command in the web app, right? Oops. Parties, I missed that. So, well, it's complaining about something here. Let's see. So, the import order wasn't liked here either. He says we can fix it with the fix command. Okay, so that's it. He fixed everything. Well, let's also add our general command so we can run ESLint checks everywhere at once. So, here's the command. So, types, and then lint. Well, also, I find it convenient to call them concurrently. You can group with the team as you prefer. Let's check. Now, lint check is performed everywhere at once. The check is running. Excellent. All set. Now we always have good code style. Now I'll make sure I haven't forgotten to tell you anything in this lesson. Didn't forget to mention anything, that's all. Thank you. Soon we'll make sure ESLint type checking is triggered automatically on commit and protect our repo from any ugly, poor quality, and non-functional code. Thank you. Let's move on.